We're just north of Olympia at the Nisqually Wildlife Refuge. We tried to visit here a couple of days earlier, but the parking lot was so full we had to change our plans. We've always come here in winter or in early spring because the boardwalks and gravel paths are walkable, and a lot of the other trails are still muddy. We would love to come back here in late spring when everything is green and the birds are singing. Nisqually comes from the word squally, meaning prairie grass. The Nisqually call themselves Squally Abj, which means people of the grass country in the Salish language. Billy Frank Jr., for whom the park is now named, was a Nisqually Indian activist who fought for native treaty fishing rights in the 1960s and 70s. The Judge Bolt decision in favor of the native tribes in 1974 led to a joint control of fisheries between the state of Washington and the native tribes, and cooperation between the two organizations to preserve the habitat. There were a lot of birders there. I'm kind of into photography and birding looks like fun, but I think I would rather shoot tropical birds. The birds are prettier and the weather is warmer. This year, now that we are retired and have more time, we've started to try and look up information about where we are going. Things like history, features, things to see, etc. Anything that might make the visit even more interesting. From previous visits, we already knew that the refuge site used to be the Brown farm. We wondered how this was possible, since from I-5 it just looks like a large salt marsh at the mouth of the Nisqually River. Turns out, a lot of history happened at this site. In 1845, the James McAllister family settled here and dammed Medicine Creek to build a sawmill. By 1852, they were producing some of the first lumber to be exported from the Puget Sound to San Francisco. This is also the site of the signing of the first Indian Treaty in Washington Territory in 1854. In 1904, Alson Brown and his wife purchased 2,300 acres of the Nisqually River estuary. Alson Brown was a Seattle lawyer. A big city lawyer quits his practice to take up farming. Why does that sound so familiar? Because we are there. He hired a crew of 30 men, and using horse-drawn scoops, they created a 4-mile dike. The fertile river deltas were converted to crop production. The farm also raised chickens and hogs, ran a dairy, and maintained a general store. There was also an apple orchard which still exists on the property. The foundations of many of the buildings still exist. It would have been nice to see them to get a better idea of how the farm was laid out. Brown's success made him a local celebrity. In 1913, an Olympia newspaper, the Washington Standard, reported that Brown raised 45,000 chickens a year, gathered 1,500 eggs a day, kept herds of 1,200 pigs, 150 milk cows, and 100 horses, farmed 800 acres, and employed 35 to 50 men. Brown's dormitories, blacksmith shop, meatpacking facilities, power plant, creamery, and industrial organization impressed officials from the Northern Pacific, one of whom called it the finest example of diversified farming he had ever seen. That year, the U.S. Postal Service began the parcel post system, and Brown used it to market his goods directly to local consumers. Kind of an early version of Amazon Fresh. World War I brought prosperity for many American farmers, but Brown fell on hard times. He spent $250,000, about $5 million in today's money, to maintain his operations and brought in only $220,000. At the same time, his investments in Australian mining tumbled, and Brown went bankrupt in 1918. The farm, which was valued at $300,000, sold at auction for just $26,766 in 1919. The twin barns were built by one of the subsequent owners of the farm. The sign back there says that these two twin barns are all that remains, and this dike out here are all that remains of the old Brown farm. Port officials had been eyeing the Nisqually Delta since the 1940s as an ideal location for a superport. The Puget Sound plunges to a depth of 200 feet off the Nisqually Flats, making a true deepwater facility possible. Also, the Delta provided a large area of flat land to hold cargo. Interstate 5 and the tracks of the Northern Pacific run right by the Delta and made it even more desirable. It's very interesting how differently everyone sees this land. The Nisqually see it as a place to catch fish. James McAllister saw it as a place to set up a sawmill, with the river for power and the Puget Sound to get his lumber to market. Alson Brown saw it as a place to raise crops and livestock. E.L. Perry, manager of the Tacoma Port, saw it as a superport. After 175 years of progress, we've managed to almost get back to where we started. The Nisqually are fishing the river, and the land is primarily a habitat for birds and fish.